Hello everyone, welcome to my session for the Festive Tech Calendar 2024. I'm Wyatt Hathout, a software engineer at Microsoft and a fan of .NET. But unlike many .NET developers, I don't use Visual Studio, VS Code, or JetBrains Rider. Instead, I use Neovim. I code inside a terminal on PowerShell using Windows. Switching to Neovim has completely transformed my workflow and the way I write code. It's not just about efficiency or configurability, it introduced me to a whole new world of CLI tools working seamlessly together, and to a keyboard-based workflow using a Windows styling manager. Neovim has also a vibrant and welcoming open source community, which has inspired me to create my own open source tools and projects. But before we dive into all that, let me clarify one thing. I'm not here to convince you to switch to Neovim or claim it's a better workflow. Visual Studio, for example, is an incredible IDE. In fact, I used it for most of my career, and when it comes to debugging, I think it's the best in the industry, truly in a league of its own. I also believe that you should use the tools and workflows that work best for you. This session is not about convincing, it is about sharing. And I'll share my workflow and how it has evolved and the tools I have discovered along the way. In addition, this was also a bit of an adventure, a way to examine how the .NET tooling interacts with and supports non-Microsoft tools like Neovim, and I'll be sharing my thoughts and experiences as well. So it all started when I attended a session by a good friend and a colleague. During his presentation, he was navigating and editing code at lightning speed, and I was blown away, because as someone who was already familiar with most of Visual Studio's shortcuts, I couldn't imagine being that fast. I was fast, but not that fast. I asked him about it, expecting him to share some new shortcuts or maybe an extension for Visual Studio that I didn't know about. But to my surprise, he said he was using Vim Motions. I didn't know it back then, but Vim Motions are a way to edit and manipulate text with an incredible precision and speed. I was stunned, because up to that point, I thought of Vim as a legacy editor, something you'd only use for quick edits on a Linux server when you had no other option. Anyhow, I came across videos from creators showcasing the speed, flexibility, and modernity of Neovim. What struck me the most was how unique each setup was. Every Neovim instance was customized to look, and more importantly, to behave differently, tailored to the creator's workflow. Don't get me wrong, I still thought they were a bit crazy, and I still didn't plan to go full Neovim, but I began to realize just how powerful Vim Motions could be, and I decided to give it a shot by using VS Vim, a Vim emulator for Visual Studio, to introduce those motions into my workflow. To my surprise, once I mastered Vim Motions, I started craving more. I wanted features from Neovim that weren't supported by the emulators or by Visual Studio itself. And about 2 years ago, I decided to go all in into Neovim. It took some adjustments and a steep learning curve, but for me, it was totally worth it. So let's start from the terminal. And as you can see, my terminal is pretty plain. It doesn't have any fancy colors or icons. And that is because whenever I add some, I feel that it gets slower and slower. And I want to keep my terminal fast, so that if I open a new tab, it will be opened very quickly. To open Neovim, I just need to write nvim here, and it opens almost instantaneously. And I can do it again, so I can close it, it will also close very fast, and open it again, and I can do it very, very fast. So this is something that I like with Neovim. I can open it whenever I want, and I don't need to wait or to time it beforehand. So now let's go and look for some files, and I can do that using a fuzzy search, meaning I don't need to write the entire or the exact name of the file. And as you can see, I can also see a preview on the right. In addition to fuzzy file search, I can also search for content. So for example, if I'll search for the text hello, it will find all of the files having hello text in it. We also get modern editor features like auto completions or IntelliSense, and we can see that we can get also the overloads of methods. And if you notice, we also have Copilot here trying to complete what I wanted to write, and of course also errors and warnings. So in Neovim, everything is about extensions. So for example, the file name fuzzy search or the file content search, all of them are supported because of extensions. Neovim's community or open source community is tremendous. It's very welcoming and it's very vibrant. And so for example, if you like to use a file explorer like Visual Studio's file explorer, then you can also install extensions that does exactly that. For example, this one is called Neotree, and you can view files, you can navigate to files, and you can open it, close it, open it on the right, on the bottom, on the left. You can do basically whatever you want with it. Let's talk about Vim Motions. Vim Motions lets you manipulate and control text in a very precise manner. They are basically commands that move the cursor through text in various ways, and they behave like a meta language of sorts. You can chain commands to perform complex actions. It is almost like programming the editor to perform text manipulation for you. Vim operates using various modes, with the primary ones being normal mode, insert mode, and visual mode. Insert mode functions like a typical text editor, while visual mode is used for selecting text. However, the real power of Vim lies in normal mode, where every character you type serves as a part of a command or a motion. For example, pressing V in normal mode switches you to visual mode, where you can move to select text. So as you can see, whenever I move horizontally, a text is selected. So let's make it practical. Let's say I want to select the entire function name, which is writeLine. Then I can use it with a Vim motion. For example, VIW. V stands for visual mode, I stands for inside, and W targets the word, which is in Vim a consecutive block of text. So VIW selects the whole word. And I can do the same with C. So C is for changing a single character, but if I want to change the whole name of the function, I can write CIW. Now let's take it further. Let's say that instead of changing only the function name, I want to change the content of the string. So if to change the function name, I needed to write CIW, which is W is for word, a consecutive text. Here I need to change everything inside a double bracket. So instead of W, I just write double bracket. So if now I write CIW bracket, it will let me change everything inside the double bracket. And I can write here, for example, festive tech calendar. And let's say that I also have some parameters here, doesn't matter what, and I want to change everything inside the parentheses. So I can just write CI parentheses, and I can write something else if I want to. Now, let's say that I have a function as well. And in this case, this function has one line, which is console writeLine, but let's say that I just created more lines into it, and now I want to change the content of the function, so I can do the same. But this time, instead of parentheses, I can use CI squarely brackets. Okay, so let's remove this function for now. And instead of that, let's talk about horizontal jumping. So now let's say that I am currently standing on the O in the word console, and I want to jump to the capital L. So F will jump to the right and to the exact characters that I have selected. So F capital L will jump to the capital L. If I want to go back, I can just use capital F and the character I want to jump to the left side. The same with T. T is similar to F, but if F ends up exactly on the character that I have chosen, T will end up on a character before. And I can use F and T with more complex motion. So for example, let's say that currently I have a writeLine and I want it to be only right. I don't want the line at the end. And because I'm already ended up on the capital L, I can just use DT parentheses and it will do that exactly. This is not a Vim or Vim Motions tutorial. And besides, there are better tutorials videos out there. Instead, let's talk about the extensions and tools I use with Vim and how I use them throughout my workflow. As I have mentioned before, Neovim is all about extensions and configurability. And Neovim's open source community is vibrant and it has tons of extensions. So one extension, for example, that I really like is called Auto Session, which each time you close Neovim, it will save your open files and even the location of the cursor. So for example, I will close Neovim now and I'll open it again, and we can see that it not only opens the same file, but the cursor location is also the same. And it can even do more things. For example, I can jump to another session. So here I'm editing this demo, but I can jump to my other open source project called Dumpify, and I can edit things here, and whenever I'm done, I can go back to wherever I came from. This is super useful because it lets you move around projects really quickly without needing to manage a bunch of windows. We all know context switches can be tough, so tools like this help me stay focused and get back to what I'm working on faster, reducing the disruption of context switches. So now let's talk about terminals. Let's say that I'm writing code and I need to run a terminal command, and I have different options to do it. I can either create a new terminal tab. I'm using, by the way, Windows Terminal, so I can just create new tabs in Windows Terminal, or I can use an extension which opens terminals inside Neovim, and I have one configured with a preset. So for example, there's a main terminal or the inside terminal that I have in Vim, and it's a floating one, but I also have one that is at the bottom, one that is at the right, and another one that's also floating. So I have 4 terminals that I can use to write commands, and I can leave them open while I am editing code, or close them and open them whenever I want. And I can also use these terminals to open CLI tools. For example, for Git, I would like to use LazyGit. So I have a key binding for LazyGit, and whenever I press it, it will open a nested terminal with a LazyGit window in it. And I like LazyGit very much because it is very functional. It's very easy to do or to perform Git commands. Usually you only press one letter to perform a command instead of writing the whole command into the CLI. Another extension that I use a lot is called /NVim, which lets you navigate code using the keyboard. So let's create a new function to demonstrate that. Let's let Copilot do everything for us. And now I'm at the current line. Let's say that I want to jump to the name of the function. Well, I can do that in multiple ways, but using Flash, it's super easy. I press S, then I start typing the characters I want to jump to. So because the function name is called fib, I can just write FIB or FI, and we can see that we already have a completion, and the completion basically locate all of the places that contained FI or FIB and adds a character to it. And whenever I press that character, it will automatically jump there. So if I press S, it will jump to the name of the function. Now let's do the same, but say I want to jump to the word hello. I can press S, HEL, and already know that if I press A, it will jump there, and it did. So it's very powerful, and I can navigate the code very, very quickly using this approach. By the way, there's a very similar extension for Visual Studio called PZMotion. The name PZMotion comes from EasyMotion, which is the name of one of the first extensions for Vim and Neovim that implemented this feature. But it doesn't have all of the features that /NVim contain. There are a ton of other extensions that I really like, but let's get to what everyone's probably wondering. How is the experience with .NET? It is a bit complicated. Neovim supports programming languages using LSP, or Language Server Protocol. It is a standard for communication between editors and language servers. It enables features like code completion, refactoring, and all the tools you would expect for working in modern editors. LSP, although initially developed for VS Code, has been since adopted by the community and is now widely used in most editors and IDEs. Right now, there is no official language server for .NET supported by Microsoft. I use OmniSharp, an open source language server for C#. It works well, but it has its quirks, and it seems like it's mainly maintained by one person, although initially OmniSharp has been developed by Microsoft. Using the terminal and Neovim also means relying more on the .NET CLI. And the .NET CLI is fantastic. It's incredibly robust and super convenient to use. For example, let's try to build and run this program. Let's first delete the pod that we don't want, and I can just type .NET run, and it will build and compile the snippets that we have here. But there are a few workflows where a UI could really help, like managing package and project references. To address that, I created an open source project called dotnet.nvim, a Neovim extension designed specifically for this. I won't demo everything, but there are features in it that, in my subjective opinion, offer a better experience than Visual Studio, VS Code, or even Rider. Let's demonstrate some of the features. Currently, I have only one project, so let's create a new one. I can use this window, which will show all of the installed templates, and I can even search. So if I write here console, it will show me the console app, and writing enter, it will ask me for a path. So let's call it demo 1, and it will create it. And if I refresh the file explorer, then we can even see it. Now let's add a reference to it. So if I will open the Festive Tech CS Proj, it is empty, it doesn't have any references, and I can just open this window. It will let me select the project that I want to add reference to. I can even filter if I needed. And then it will let me select the projects that I want to add as a reference, and I will choose demo 1, and we can see that it is already added. Similarly, I can even remove references or even add references for NuGet packages. So I can open this window, it will ask me again to which project I want to add the NuGet to, and I will select Festive Tech Calendar Demo, and then to let me filter and search for the NuGet, and I can write Dumpify and add it, and after a second we can see it now in the CS Proj. It can also bootstrap C# files. So for example, if I create a new file, we can see that it has a namespace and a class in it, and it will determine the namespace according to the file structure, very similar to what we have with Visual Studio. It has more features, but let's move on to something else people often ask about, which is debugging. While there is a debugging experience in Neovim using Netcore DBG, a .NET debugger developed by Samsung for their Tizen platform, it offers debugging tools and experience similar to VS Code and other editors. That said, it doesn't compare to Visual Studio. Personally, it doesn't happen often, but for really complex bugs, Visual Studio is still the best tool to use. And honestly, that's true even if you are using VS Code or Rider. Visual Studio's debugger is just that good. To make things easier, I wanted a simple workaround to dump an entire object into the console for simple scenarios. Instead of hovering over values in the debugger, I wanted to print all the members of an object in a structured and colorful way. That's how I came up with Dumpify, an open source project I developed to do exactly that in .NET. So now let's add new member to the test class. Let's say a name and a description that works and returns to main. We can create a new instance. Var test equal to new test. Copilot for the help, and we have a squiggly lines. That is because test is inside another namespace, so we need to add a using. And this window is with the help of OmniSharp, the language server. We added the using, and now we can call dump, which is the extension method added via the Dumpify NuGet package. And we also need to add a reference or a using to that namespace. Now let's run it. .NET run, and we can see this table, which is actually the object, and it will work even with collections. For example, enumerable range, that works as well. We can also add labels for dumps, and let's run it again. This time we can even see the collection, and it will work basically with any .NET managed object. It is extremely configurable, it supports nested objects, circular references, and has plenty of other features that you can view in GitHub or in the available content and videos. Not everything we do relates to code, so there are some things that we need to do outside of Neovim. For example, I'm at the current path, and let's say that I want to jump to a different path and maybe work on a different project. So instead of trying to figure out or to remember the full path, I can use a PowerShell module called Z. So if I write Z Dumpify, it will jump to the Dumpify project, and if I write Z Muayyad, it will jump to my dot files, which are called Neovim Muayyad, and actually with a different casing. So you only need to remember the directory name or part of the directory name, and Z can jump there automatically. Every time you move around using CD or using Z, Z will remember the history, and the next time you try to jump somewhere, Z will remember it. Regarding controlling files like deleting files, copying files, or creating files, we can use Yazi. Yazi is an open source CLI tool which let us explore the file system, but inside the CLI, and it can also view files at the right and even pictures. And we can use it to create new directories, move files, rename files. Basically, whatever we can do with Windows Explorer, we can also do here using Yazzie. Another tool I love using outside of Neovim is a Windows Tiling Manager. It helps me organize windows, control where they are placed, and switch between them using the keyboard. At first, I was skeptical. I'd mostly seen tiling managers used on Linux and didn't think they were really necessary. Plus, it was hard to find a good one for Windows. But recently, I have discovered Glazed WM, or Glazed Windows Manager, which is an open source tiling manager for Windows, and after using it for a bit, I just became hooked. There are many benefits or features to tiling managers, but I want to show you two. One of them is the ability to open a new window and that it will be placed near the current window. So I don't really like to open multiple windows at once, or at least not using them one beside the other, but when I have to, it helps a lot. So for example, here I have the terminal and I can just open Notepad and it is placed automatically near it. And I can even move it around, put it in the bottom, on the top, or even close it, all using the keyboard. The next feature is called Workspaces. It is very similar to Virtual Desktop, but it is a bit easier to move around and to control windows and in which virtual desktop they are located. So you probably have noticed that I have a bar here containing text and numbers, and it is called ZBar. It is a bar that you can use beside your tiling manager, or you can use the tiling manager without it. I like to use it. And basically, each number or text that I have at ZBar is an opened workspace, and I can move around them very quickly. So for example, now I'm currently at a workspace named Code, but I can move around to a workspace called Firefox, where I have my Firefox browser window. I can go to one called Edge, where I have my Edge window, and I can go back to my core window. I can even move my current window to a different workspace. For example, I can move my current terminal to workspace number 1 besides the Firefox, and I can even move it then back to Edge and return it to where it was on workspace that is named Code. And this feature is very handy because it lets you create some sort of a preset, and you can jump around between multiple windows or open windows very precisely and easy. So if I wanted to go to a specific Firefox window, I can do that. If I want to go to another window, I can do that as well. It's very easy to create new workspaces on the fly. And basically, I love this feature. It is an integral part of my current workflow. The next tool I want to show you is not terminal-based. It is actually an extension for browsers. It is called Vimium, and it is available for Firefox, Edge, and Chrome, and maybe even others. And I love it because I can navigate web pages very easily. So I can scroll very easily, and I can even jump and enter links. So for example, whenever I press F, I see a letter above each link, and I can just press on that letter. So we have here that speakers is letter D. You can see it here. So by pressing D, now we went to the speakers page, and I can search for my name, for example, go back to the top of the page, or even go back to where I were. The best part is that aside from the browser extension, everything is configured through a central GitHub repository, which makes it super easy to share across all my workstations. These configurations are usually called dot files. They are common with Linux, but we can take a similar approach in Windows as well. So my dot files are under the Neovim IDE repository, and we can go there and open it via Neovim. And here, for example, we see my PowerShell profile, which is also something that I share across workstations. And we can even see my Neovim configurations, plugins, everything that I have configured. In addition to Glazed WM or Glazed Windows Manager, I also configure it here. This is a very convenient approach because I can share the same configuration and the same experience across my all workstations or laptops. I push new changes to GitHub and I pull them in other machines, and they are automatically applied. And regarding dependencies, I use Winget to install everything. And there's a neat feature in Winget where you can specify in a YAML file all of the dependencies that you need and even configuration. So for example, you can even specify that you like to use a dark theme in Windows, or the background, and Winget can install and adjust everything for you. And I do that using configuration files as well. So we can see here that I have my configurations, and This one has all of the dependencies for Neovim, all of the tools that Neovim runs for me, including LazyGit and FZF for file searching, FD for finding files, and anything else that I need. It also configures environment variables that I also use with Neovim. And in addition to that, regarding other dependencies that are not directly related to Neovim, I have a different configuration file, which has in it all of the things that I need for my workflow that are outside of Neovim, including setting the window theme to dark mode, installing PowerShell core, adjusting the PowerShell profile, installing Firefox, even Visual Studio if I ever need it, WhatsApp, Spotify, everything that I use daily is included there. And it is very easy to apply all of this configuration using NuGet. We need only to write NuGet configure. And by the way, I have here history for PowerShell using PS readline. So I already ran this file before, and I can just run it again if I want to, but running NuGet configure and passing the configuration file will let NuGet do everything for you. It will set up all of the dependencies you want, and it will also adjust all of the configuration. To sum it up, it's been quite a journey for me. As a Windows user, I've spent most of my career preferring UI over CLI, only using the CLI when necessary. Shifting my workflow hasn't been easy. It's been full of learning curves and dealing with tools that didn't always play nicely with .NET. That said, I found Vim motions to be incredibly powerful, and I think every developer should consider using them. No matter the editor or IDE, there are emulators available for most of them, like VS Vim for Visual Studio and VS Code Vim for VS Code, and JetBrains Rider already support them. While Neovim isn't perfect and the .NET experience can sometimes feel lacking, I genuinely enjoy using it. It's improved my workflow, not just for coding, but also in how I use tools around it, including a Windows Styling Manager. Moving to a keyboard-first workflow has really worked for me. Like I have mentioned, this video is about sharing, not convincing. Every developer has their own workflow and tools, and that is perfectly fine. One workflow isn't necessarily better than another, and what works for me might not work for you. The most important thing is to use tools that you enjoy and that makes you feel productive. With that, I wrap up and say Merry Christmas.